Scream 7 asks the age-old question that the franchise has posed since its first reboot. How does Ghostface go on without Sidney Prescott? Welcome back to ScreenCrush, I'm Ryan Airy, and we're going to break down the loaded ending of the newest Scream installment and explain what may be next for Woodsboro's final girl and her decades-old fight against the brutal slasher. Spoiler warning, of course, for the plot of Scream 7. Now, Scream 7 had a bit of a tumultuous road to screen with multiple firings and hirings and a reported $500,000 rewrite and 3 director changes. It's actually a miracle we ended up with the film that we did. Finally, the project landed in the hands of horror legend Kevin Williamson, and that might have been the best outcome of its initial rocky production. Williamson, best known for penning the original Scream as well as parts 2 and 4, returns to the franchise with a deep understanding of what drives these characters and how to continue Sidney's story without too much retreading. Much like the thesis of this film, he goes back to his roots. His familiarity with Sidney and the history of Ghostface gives the story a sort of confidence that was missing from the initial reboot, making this torch passing feel far more natural than in the 2022 requel.
Enjoy that torch.
Of all the legacy sequels in the franchise, this one feels the most legacy of them all. Neve Campbell returns as Sidney Prescott, not just as a point-and-you-miss-it cameo, but as the lead of the film. Now, while it does still include some of the newer characters like Mindy and Chad, they're integrated in a way that feels natural and not just thrown in there as a way to connect to the previous installment. At its core, Scream 7 revisits what fans loved about the original, but it does so with the kind of self-awareness that defined the series in the first place.
That's why she always outsmarted the killer in the big chase scene at the end. Only virgins can do that. Don't you know the rules?
It even begs to ask the franchise's long-standing question. Do the Scream films really need Sidney, or do we just think that they do? Now, while Scream 7 does exist within the continuity of the soft reboot sequel, it feels like the beginning of a new direction for the franchise. The previous 2 films took Ghostface in new directions, literally relocating him to New York in Scream 6. But in doing so, they drifted too far from what made the original films work: personal connection. The killers in Scream 5 were motivated by fandom, not of the in-universe crimes, but of the fictional stab films.
This time, the fans are going to be the ones who win.
And the killers in Scream 6 were just related to them. It felt disconnected from the original motivations of Ghostface. Now, while it reflected modern horror culture, it was far too removed from Sidney's story. But Scream 7 corrects that. Rather than continuing to add in people and lore into the universe, it turns its focus inward, going back into Sidney's past and reconnecting Ghostface to the original trauma and legacy that all started in Woodsboro. This allows the franchise to give Sidney's story a sense of closure without ending the franchise entirely. The cold open sets the tone for the entirety of the movie. We see a couple arriving at the original Woodsboro house, but it's not as investigators or teens trespassing. They're fans. The boyfriend is obsessed with the 1996 murders, pointing out each death location, playing around with the body outlines, and quizzing his less interested girlfriend on trivia about the case. There are plaques along the walls, pointing out every person who dies within the house, and a shrine dedicated to the in-universe stab films. Those are the adaptations of Gail Weathers' books. This opening isn't subtle in what it's portraying, and it's not trying to be subtle. This installment shifts the obsession. Instead of targeting crazed stab superfans like Scream 5 did, Scream 7 zeroes in on the culture surrounding true crime. Throughout the film, characters interact with Sidney less like she's a survivor and more like she's a character to obsess over. There are multiple references to true crime podcasts. One of the main characters, Lucas, even wants to start his own. And this evolution makes sense. The franchise has always reflected the media landscape of its time, and in today's world, true crime dominates. According to a 2024 Edison research study, 84% of Americans over 13 consume true crime content in some form, with the genre's popularity tripling in just over 5 years. Now, Scream has always been about dissecting whatever cultural obsession is most prominent. Here, the fixation is not horror movies, but real-life horror packaged as entertainment. After the couple relives the brutal murders that once took place in the house, a new Ghostface reminds them of what they're actually romanticizing. He kills them, douses them in the house in gasoline, and burns it to the ground, erasing the glazed, Hollywoodified mythology that was built around these gruesome crimes. He reminds the audience that Ghostface is not a Halloween decoration or a quirky character to fangirl over. He is a serial killer, and that shift gives the film thematic weight. By reframing Ghostface as this horrific monster and Sidney as a repeatedly exploited victim, the film puts its real theme into focus: motherhood and legacy. After the opening, the film mirrors the original nearly beat for beat. We open on a girl in her bedroom and her boyfriend climbing through the window to visit her. This time it isn't Sidney and Billy, it's Sidney's daughter, Tatum. The scene plays out exactly the way it did in the first film. The boyfriend sneaks in and the parent barges in.
Can you knock?
And he has to hide under the bed. They even reuse the music, a cover of Blue Oyster Cult's Don't Fear the Reaper. Now through this parallel, we see how similar Tatum is to Sidney. They share the same rebellious streak and vulnerability. Tatum even admitting to her mother later on that she was afraid to further her relationship with her boyfriend, just like Sidney was with Billy. And that similarity is what terrifies Sidney. She keeps her daughter at arm's length, not letting her know about her past out of fear for her. She's terrified that the cycle will repeat with Tatum, which they even say as much later in the film. Motherhood and the inheritance of trauma have always been central to Scream. The original murders were rooted in the death of Sidney's mother. In the first film, Sidney spends the entire movie reassessing what she thought she knew about her mom.
And I can't keep lying to myself about who my mom was. I think I'm really scared that I'm gonna turn out just like her, you know?
That uncertainty shaped her identity in the relationship with the people around her.
So you have a few intimacy issues as a result of your mother's untimely death.
So it makes perfect sense that decades later, she approaches motherhood with that same fear. Sidney doesn't know how to protect Tatum except by shielding her from the world that made her infamous, that turned her into the final girl of the Woodsboro massacre. But her protection of Tatum only drives them further apart. When Sidney tries to connect with her daughter about her past, Tatum throws the same narrative back at her, lashing out about being named after a victim instead of the lone survivor. Again, it connects to how Sidney's whole life has been reduced to this single narrative of the final girl. Even to her own daughter, she isn't named after Sidney's lifelong friend Tatum.
No, please don't kill me, Mr. Ghostface. I want to be in the sequel.
But instead after the girl who died in the garage. The sensationalizing of true crime has infiltrated every aspect of Sidney's life, not allowing her to simply be a mother to her daughter, but instead the Sidney Prescott and the legacy that she's expected to pass down. Now, like we said earlier, this film follows many of the same beats as the original. Once a teen is murdered at the school, mirroring the principal's death in the first film, the entire town goes on lockdown. We get a near scene-for-scene recreation of the original lockdown sequence set to Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds' Red Right Hand. And this isn't just nostalgia bait, it highlights the cyclical nature of Ghostface and how the publicity surrounding the horrific murders back in the 90s continues to create copycat killers, as we have seen in every sequel so far. I mean, hell, Scream 5 didn't even have killers motivated by their original crimes, but by the popular films based on those crimes. The legacy of these murders has been so completely co-opted by Hollywood and the media that the trauma Sidney endured is nearly forgotten in favor of the fame that she unwillingly gained. This film breaks down the glossy facade and returns to where it all started, back to the roots of the franchise. The film's poster even echoes this theme. The tagline, "Face Your Past," directly calls out what Sidney has to confront, and it visually mirrors the original Scream poster. After leaving Woodsboro, Sidney has spent her entire life trying to move on, never fully reconciling with what happened or allowing her daughter to get close to that part of her history, which leads Tatum to resent her. When Tatum decides to take authority for herself, ignoring her mom's wishes to stay out of the Ghostface case, we see history begin to repeat itself. With the help of Chad and Mindy, Tatum gathers her friends at a bar to speculate on potential suspects, and Ghostface attacks them, picking off her friends one by one until it comes down to a final showdown between Tatum and the slasher. But once again, our expectations are subverted. We are expecting Tatum to step into the role of the final girl, like her mom. But as Mindy said in the last film,
franchises only survive by subverting expectations.
She's actually overtaken by Ghostface, completely unprepared to fight a killer like this. Sidney's method of protecting her daughter has been for naught.
By keeping the past from her daughter, she's made her vulnerable.
Sidney only became the hardened survivor she is through repeated experience. As we saw in the introduction scene, she and Tatum were nearly identical before Sidney had to fight off Ghostface again and again and again. This Ghostface targets Sidney like never before. Not only does he, or it's later revealed she, harass and kidnap her daughter, but she also weaponizes technology to torment Sidney. We've seen updated Ghostface tech in newer films like voice mimickers.
Who is this?
It's Mother, Laura.
But never to this extent. This Ghostface uses AI and deepfakes to resurrect figures from the past, including Stu, Dewey, Mrs. Loomis, and Roman. These cameos aren't just nostalgia callbacks. They are another nod to the obsessive, parasocial relationship that true crime fans can develop with the people who are actually connected to these cases. The killer is then revealed to be Jessica Bowden, a friend of Sidney's who became so obsessed with the case that when Sidney withdrew from the public eye, Jessica checked herself herself into a psychiatric facility, determined to bring back the Sidney that she believed she knew. During her monologue, Jessica questions whether Ghostface can exist without Sidney, a meta nod to Neve Campbell's absence from Scream 6. Jessica insists that Ghostface doesn't need Sidney and that it's time for a new beginning for the killer. And for a moment, it did feel like the film might actually kill Sidney off, but I'm glad it didn't. Killing her here would have only continued the cycle that the entire film is trying to break. Billy killing Sidney's mother started this chain of events. Sidney's death would simply pass that on to Tatum. The film also delivers a long-awaited interview between Sidney and Gail.
He's not answering any questions, all right? Just leave us alone.
It mirrors the off-the-record interview in the original film.
No, Cotton murdered my mother.
You're not so sure anymore, are you?
Except now, the focus isn't on Sidney's mother, it's on Sidney as a mother. It puts her in a very interesting position, caught between giving information to help catch Ghostface or protecting her daughter from the media exposure that Sidney was never shielded from. The film ends with a badass mother-daughter team-up that has Sidney finally facing her past head-on instead of running from it. She's ready to step away from being Sidney Prescott, the woman forever fleeing Woodsboro, and towards simply being Sidney Prescott, a mom. Now, while the film gives us closure on Sidney's story, what is next for Ghostface's legacy as a whole? Did they truly end the decades-long battle against Ghostface? Probably not. According to Variety, an 8th installment is already in development, so Ghostface isn't going to stay gone for long. We also have a solid group of characters to continue following. Tatum's actress, Isabel May, is an up-and-coming talent, so I could easily see the franchise building around her in another sequel. And Chad and Mindy are still alive and well. Maybe Mindy could eventually step into the Gale Weathers role within the franchise, as they hinted at the end. I do hope we revisit Sam and Tara's stories at some point, but who knows. Anyways, those are just our thoughts. What did you guys think? Do you want them to kill off one of horror's most famous final girls, or do you want to see more of Sidney? Big shout out to Lee Mazzio who wrote this video. You can find his links below, and let us know your thoughts down in the comments below, or find us on our free to join Discord server. And if it's your first time here, please subscribe, smash that bell for alerts. For ScreenCrush, I'm Ryan Airy.